G'day, and welcome to my updated review of the 2020 Kawasaki Ninja 1000 SX. I was hoping by now to have 5,000 kilometres on a tour trip under my belt, but unfortunately due to a decision made by the authorities on the coronavirus, I've got Buckley's chance of that happening now. However, I have had my first service, and I'm now over 3,000 kilometres on the bike, meaning I've had unrestricted access with what I can do with the engine for the last 2,000 kilometres. And while I haven't completely gone off like a cut snake, I have had a rip snorter of a time on this thing. There are a number of things I've picked up on and would like to share with you. Like my last review though, this review may come across as being overcritical. I do plan on giving this bike a fair go, but again, the idea of being critical isn't to put the bike down, is to allow you as a viewer to decide what is and isn't important or applicable to your priorities instead of me deciding on your behalf. I know that this video is long. I'm being long-winded and I apologise in advance, so some of you probably want me to put a sock in it and just get to some points. So to try and help you out there, here is a list of timelines on what I'm talking about, so if you want to skip ahead to the things that are important to you, please do so. For those who haven't seen my previous videos, this bike was in part a reluctant purchase. I was coming off a VFR and I was upgrading out of necessity. I purchased this bike unseen and unridden, and even with my reservations, I can say that this bike has been beaut. I don't regret my decision at all. However, I do believe that Kawasaki has some room for improvements with the later model, and that I will be discussing here. First of all, to the riding aids and the cruise control. Look, the cruise works real ace, but there are some gotchas to be aware of. First of all, the cruise does forget what you've preset it to if you drop below a certain speed. It's somewhere below 30 kilometres, 20 miles an hour, don't know exactly where that is. Sometimes I've found that I have been unable to set it or engage it. One of these cases has been when I've been going uphill, up an incline, but there's been some other areas and I haven't been able to quite put my finger on what those are yet. I've also noticed that it does retard when you're in a corner. I found this out because I was in one of our restrictive speed limit zones, 80 kilometres an hour on corners you could have easily done 100 k's an hour on. So I just set this cruise control to make sure I wasn't going to speed through these, and I noticed that when I leaned over beyond a certain amount, the cruise control retarded and started to slow down a little bit. It fixed itself up when I got back upright again, but it wasn't something I was expecting. I've also had a couple of glitches with the cruise control. Once when I was on the freeway, I went to set it to do 113 kilometers indicated, and it's blipped the throttle and showed for a moment and showed 63 kilometers on the cruise control setting. So I'm not sure what happened there, whether a bug got in a sensor or something, but that's only happened once. Another time it did just lurch momentarily, full throttle, because I was actually lower gears, high revs at the time, so I significantly noticed it. I don't believe I bumped anything, and certainly not enough to make it lurch through that much, but with 3,000 kilometres, these are the only two little glitches that I've seen. However, it's been enough for me to go, okay, cruise control is for the open road when I'm going straight, and once I hit anything where I'm going to be leaning over, I'm going to have it turned off just to be on the safe side. There are multiple ways of stopping the cruise control, which of course includes touching the brakes, slipping in the clutch or hitting the button. However, they've also introduced rolling off the throttle, just rolling that forward from neutral or zero, which is really quite a nice touch. I've also noticed that having cruise on a bike has significantly removed some of my concentration I've required when going through town to stick to the speed limit. This is a big deal because here in Australia the authorities are dodgy as. We're booked for doing as little as 2 miles an hour or 3 kilometres an hour over the speed limit. And having the cruise control and using it through town, I've noticed that I've got a lot more time now, or a lot more concentration available to me to focus on what's more important, the risks, kids jumping out from behind parked cars or anything else like that, instead of constantly looking down and seeing what my speed's doing. So that was an unexpected bonus I've noticed. Going to the rider aids, the quick shifter. Some people say there is no need for it off the track. But you'd think that since I don't race on tracks and I don't treat the road like a racetrack, that it would be safe to assume that I'm one of them. But you would be wrong. I love the quick shifter on the road, and not for the hoon side of things. When I'm accelerating gradually through a sweeper, I'm able to use the quick shifter to change up a gear and it's very smooth, and you want it to be smooth when you're actually got the bike leaned over. So it also allows for changing gears very smoothly too when you've got a pillion passenger on, so they're not moving around as much. Keep in mind here that smooth is going to be a constant theme throughout this review, because Kawasaki have made a bike that is very smooth in a number of areas. With my daughter, I noticed on the VFR that changing gears, sometimes she'd bang her helmet into my back, but not so with the Ninja. Using the quick shifter has just allowed for much more smoother general riding. It doesn't have to be limited to the racetrack. It is smooth. Now the slipper clutch I can't comment on much. I think it may have engaged once when I was riding and I was knocking it down a few gears, but I can't be certain. However, it's great peace of mind to know that it's there. One thing I have noticed and really appreciated though with it is how much lighter the clutch is to pull, especially after a full day's riding. You might not notice it at the start, but I do notice at the end of a day that I just don't, it's much nicer on the left hand there. Going to rider's age and the ABS, I found that the rear seemed to kick in a little bit soon. Now I emphasise seemed here for a few reasons. First of all, remember I'm coming off a VFR that has linked brakes, so maybe I was able to apply the brake a little bit more on the VFR than I can on other unlinked bikes before it gets into the skid zone. But in all honesty, that doesn't worry me too much, because I prefer the ABS kicking in sooner on the rear brake than not, especially when you're in a corner, because obviously nobody wants to skid the rear tyre when you're in a corner. Now, the front brake ABS, on the other hand, though, seems to be ace-as. I was concerned that it might kick in prematurely and stop me from having real effective hard braking from the front. However, I've noticed I've been able to brake quite hard and then increase that brake pressure as the contact patch on the ground enlarges without the ABS kicking in, which is exactly what I'm chasing. It gives me maximum braking and it only seems to engage if it really needs to. So Kawasaki have done a great job there. Moving on to the traction control and riding modes. I haven't ridden in the rain, so I can't comment on how effective it is in the rain and slippery conditions at this point. I find that road mode is a great balance. There's plenty of power to get the flies off your back, and it allows for full acceleration up to the point that the front tyre is about to get airborne, but it doesn't. At this time, it retards the throttle, but it doesn't completely cut it. It allows you to continue to accelerate, so it's relatively smooth with the way that it retards. Or at least that's what I've found. Keep in mind, I'm 6'1", and I'm heavier than I'm going to admit here on air, so your mileage may vary with this, but from what I've seen, it just fits me like a glove. Now, sports mode seems to give me more power, but I'm not convinced that it does. My guess is that the feeling comes from not retarding the throttle when the front wheel becomes light, so to speak, so it allows for more prolonged acceleration. Keep in mind though that I've found accidentally that the sports mode will allow the front wheel to get off the ground. So while sports mode is definitely more sportier, road mode's probably a little bit more where I need to be, because I'm not really good when it comes to chucking wheelies. Now, while on the topic of ride modes, I will mention that in my previous video I said that I couldn't find a way to change the mode whilst I was riding. I'd like to thank the people that told me the secret. There is a way of doing it. You need to roll the throttle off. The throttle needs to be neutral. You can still be going along, coasting along, but slip in the clutch, roll the throttle off, and then you'll be able to hold the ride mode button down, and after a couple of seconds it will change to the next mode for you. So that's one to keep in mind. Handling. That's real bonzer, I tell you. It is so light and smooth. Kawasaki have changed the rake configuration in this model. Many riders of previous models have reported that they've switched the rear tyre from being a 50 to a 55 to improve the handling and also to make the steering more neutral. Now, I can't comment much on the change from the previous model, as I've only ridden 2, and those for short test rides, but my take on the 2020's handling with the stock tyres is that it is light and neutral. Now, I did change from stock tyres to Pilot Road. No, they're not called Pilots anymore, they're just called Road 5s, the Michelin tyres, but I kept the same 50s size on the back. I didn't change the sizes for my tour. And it may depend on my body position, but in one medium sweeper, the handling was so neutral that I was able to relax and then remove both hands off the bars for a moment to see what would happen, and it just sat there. It didn't dip in any further, it didn't straighten up. It was perfectly neutral. So again, your mileage may vary, but I really think that Kawasaki have done a great improvement with the handling, with the change to the rake position there. It's very easy for me to have transitioned to this bike from the VFR. The first day that I went walkabouts in the high country on this thing, and I've already scraped my pegs. The lean indicator at this time was 47 and 48 degrees respectively. So there's a bit of feedback that once you hit those high 40s, you are in peg scraping territory. But keep in mind, it will depend on the camber of the road, because the other day I managed to get to 49 degrees angle and there was no peg scraping. So it's going to greatly depend on the conditions. It's not definitely that you will hit the road at a particular angle. There's very smooth transition too from the throttle on to throttle off. The acceleration is butter smooth. Everything about this bike is so smooth, which really makes for an enjoyable, more relaxing, spirited ride through the twisty sections, as well as just commuting around town. Moving on to the sensors. I've noticed that on the maximum lean indicator, one thing I'm aware of is that I need to keep myself in check and not try to use this as a high score that I need to beat. That's going to be a good way for me to come a cropper if I don't keep myself in check on that. But I've actually found this quite interesting, not only for telling me when I need to back off, but also that I might be going a bit harder on a road than I anticipated on. You know, I've gone out that day and I said, look, I don't feel that great. I'm going to ride a bit conservatively, or I've got the door on the back, I'm going to ride a lot more conservatively. Having those maximum lean angle indicators tells me whether I'm pushing it a little bit more than I was planning to. The actual lean bars themselves, the real-time ones that go from green to orange to red, I've noticed end prematurely. You hit the end of these well before you hit the edge of the bike. My estimate is that they hit the red and the end around about 40 degrees, but I ain't looking at these when I'm going around a corner at that level or beyond, so it's roughly a guess. The max lean indicator obviously records beyond this though, so it seems to be the algorithm that they've used for the bar itself. I have noticed that the braking indicator hits 100% way too early. There is plenty left in the brakes afterwards before hitting the ABS. As you can see in this video, the indicator hits 100% and I can continue to squeeze a lot more out of it. Now, I know this is stationary, but I have tested this on the road as well and I found the same. I can brake considerably harder beyond when the brake indicator shows 100% before ABS territory is even close. Now the fuel sensors, I've noticed that the fuel gauge is linear and not like some other bikes I've seen where it basically shows that you've got a full tank until you're almost halfway through a tank and then it starts to tick down. The Kawasaki Ninja seems to be linear all the way through, which is something that I really appreciate. On other bikes I've ended up having to use the odometer for the fuel status to know where I'm at because the fuel indicator is just so out of whack, but on this the fuel indicator seems to be fair dinkum and trustworthy. Now onto luggage. Unfortunately, this is an area I think that they've botched up on. There's a lot that can be improved here. The first gripe I have about it is that they don't allow for the top box to be mounted when the side panniers are on it. The shape is the second thing. The panniers does make it difficult to pack the luggage with that triangle bit that comes in. Look, I know this makes it look more aggressive and looks great for photographs and so forth, but trust me, after a couple of days of packing this thing in motels and stuff like that, I'm convinced it would have been much better if they just kept a more standard shape. When you open up the lid too, the cable is too short. The lid just falls back down again. I did unscrew the cable on one of these, but then I thought better of it. I thought it might be a bad idea. Such as something I don't know. Later on I thought, well, maybe it could have opened right up and rested against the exhaust while it's on the bike and started melting, so I'm probably glad that I put the cable back in. I found that as a workaround, you can rest it on a pillow or something similar just to get that right angle for it to stay open, but honestly, it's a bit of a dog's breakfast. I feel that increasing the length of that cable by roughly an inch would have made a world of difference there, so hopefully that's something that Kawasaki might address in the future. The next thing is the Kawasaki liners. I feel ripped off here. The Kawasaki bags are way too small, as in narrow, for the pannier, and end up leaving a lot of usable space in the pannier unused. I ended up buying some Hopnels after I purchased these, and the Hopnels were the HCSL 850 liners. These are the ones for the Can-Am hard bags, and I found these to be a much better fit and to allow much more storage as well. The only difference is that they load from the top though, and they don't open up like the Kawasaki's, but to me, I actually prefer this type of loading more anyway. So compared to the Hopnell liners, I found that the Kawasaki's are asking for some big biggies at more than double the price, and personally I should have told them in hindsight that they were dreaming, but I got caught out. Hopefully what I found will help others not to get caught out. Moving on to the heated grips. The heated grips I have found do provide enough warmth, although I haven't been in frosty conditions yet, but there's a lot of areas they can improve on here too. I mentioned in my previous video that they're basically just aftermarket ones. They don't integrate with the bike or the display at all. They just plug into a power accessory port, which any other aftermarket ones can as well. So for 3 times the price, they're big biggies too. But some other gripes I've got with it is that I've noticed there's no tactile feedback when you press the button. Even without gloves on, I've hit that switch before and looked down to see that I didn't actually hit it. So you've got to look down to see what setting it's on. So when I've put on the winter gloves, which is when you're mostly going to be using this, I found it's even more difficult to know if you're on the button or not. The other thing I don't like about it is that once you hit the button, you've got to look down and count the number of flashes to know what setting you're on. And if you glance down and you see a flash and then you see it stop, you've got to wait for a full cycle anyway, because was that really one flash, or was that the end of a 2 or 3 flash cycle? This means that I've had to have my eyes off the road for a significant amount of time. Might only be a few moments, but with speed, you're traveling a significant amount of difference. So what I believe they could have improved here is to change, because they've already got a yellow colour when it's doing the flashes, and then it switches to green just to say, okay, these are turned on. Press the button again if you want to know what setting it's on. So they've already got 2 colours here. What I feel they should have done is kept a similar function, but had red when it's on the hotter setting, have yellow when it's on the medium setting, and green when it's on the lower setting. Now, I understand that this idea is not overly helpful for people who are colourblind, which is why I would suggest that they keep the flashes there for the first few cycles as they have, just a different colour. So full heat would be red, flash 3 times, do that for a couple of cycles, and then just stay red. And likewise with the orange, and likewise with the green. That way, for non-colourblind people, a very quick glance tells you exactly what's going on instead of having to count, but you've got that fallback for people who are colourblind. The other thing is that they need to change the switch to be much deeper going in, or to give some sort of tactile feedback, because as it is at the moment, you don't get that. Moving on to the wind deflector. It's really not large enough for touring if you want to keep the bugs off your visor. It protects up to the neck maybe at its highest setting. However, I do love that it has multiple settings, so you are able to fine tune it where you want it. I just need to look at getting an aftermarket wind deflector for my height. Rideology. Unfortunately, I found this program to be a big disappointment. It records a number of really cool things, including the brake and throttle control and G-force accelerations and braking and so forth, but they've completely missed out on real-time lean indicators. Yes, they give you the maximum that you've gone through the trip, but I would much prefer to be able to play back my ride and view data on a corner-by-corner basis on lean angle indicator, as you can do with almost everything else, including your water temperature. I've also noticed that the app is buggy. Many times it's been unresponsive to me. You go to record a ride and it just goes to a blackout screen, and it doesn't matter what you click after that, it's just going to keep showing a black screen, and you've got to kill the app and get back in. I've also noticed that you start recording a ride, but it might disconnect at some stage and the whole ride is lost. Likewise, you pull up somewhere, you turn off the bike, that's it, the ride has been lost. Every day I went away, I put on Rideology at the start of the day, and I also put on Riva to record the ride, and at the end of the day I noticed that Rideology just wasn't recording anymore. So at some point it's decided to go, nah, and I think that might be when you turn off the bike. It would at least be nice for it to record when you turn off the bike that, okay, I'm going to stop recording now, instead of just dumping the whole lot. It would also be nice if they could make it so you could export that data. Viewing in the app's limited with its usability. If you could export it to a GPX file so you can see on Google Earth or something else where you've actually travelled, share it with a friend. I'd even like them to go one step further and allow to export the raw data to a CSV file so you can actually use it in Excel. That way you'll be able to do things like count the number of corners you've actually been around for the day, and view things on a more detailed level. So I'm really hoping that in the future they'd make great improvements to this app. Another thing they could possibly look at doing is recording when traction control and ABS kick in as well. It could be interesting to see just how aggressive you're riding on a trip, and how often you've gone too far for improving your braking handling. Now, on my original video, I mentioned that the green stripes on the bike are stickers. Now, I've gone back and had a second look, and from what I can tell, they are also unfortunately not lacquered over. I know on my Honda, the Honda stickers, they're also stickers, they're not painted on, but they've put a coat of lacquer over the top of that to protect the paint and the stickers. This hasn't been done on the Kawasaki bike, so I don't know if that was a cost savings measure there or whatever, but that's something to keep in mind. The tyre pressure sensors would have been great too. That was a missed opportunity. I ended up installing aftermarket ones instead because, let's face it, without a centre stand, once you're used to a centre stand, it's a pain to go back to trying to check the tyre pressures. But it came in handy because on my trip back from the high country, I ended up getting a puncture, and these things warned me about it when the tyre pressure dropped to about 35 psi in the rear, and I was able to deal with it before I started riding on a flat tyre. Now, this bike does put out a lot of heat from underneath. I haven't noticed it on most of the rides that I've been on because I'm out in the country, everything's nice, and it hasn't really been that hot. But when I have been stationary on a warm day, I've noticed a little bit of heat coming out from below. I know that on previous models that some people have had problems when they've been stationary commuting in traffic on hot days, beyond 36 degrees Celsius, 100 degrees Fahrenheit, that the heat against their boots, if they're not wearing full boots, is actually quite hot. I think you're going to find the same thing, unfortunately to say, with the 2020 Ninja as well. It's pretty much the same that I found there. Also, I mentioned in my previous video that I've noticed vibrations when riding at highway speeds, and these are definitely engine vibrations because when I slip in the clutch, the vibrations stop and I can see a lot clearer through the rearview mirror. Now, I've been advised by a number of people that they've found the same thing with previous models, and that over a few thousand kilometers I should start to see that this decreases and it becomes more smoother. I am pleased to say that from what I can observe so far, I definitely think that the buzz is lessening down. I don't even notice it anymore at 100 k's an hour. If I drop a few gears and get the revs up higher, or I go higher than that, if I was to go higher than that, not saying that I have, yes, there's still some vibration there, but it's definitely reducing, especially at the highway speeds. Now, the instrument display, the visibility on this thing is brilliant. I've been riding around with it as a test on the lowest brightness settings, and even in full daylight when the sun's shining on the screen and reflecting off, or it's not, I don't even notice it. The screen is so easy to see. I don't know what Kawasaki have done here, because I know some other bikes become difficult to see in certain conditions, but I've never had a problem viewing the screen. I mentioned in my previous video that on the first day out I flicked the high beam on 2 times accidentally without noticing it. Now, I've done that only once in the last 2,000 kilometers again. So it is a little bit of a thing to watch out for if you've got big hands like mine, and especially with big winter gloves on too. But it doesn't seem to be that much of an issue. So, in summarising, if you've managed to get this far through the video, thank you. These are the things that I think Kawasaki could improve on. First of all, please consider having an optional centre stand. I'd love to be able to fit one of these to this bike. Please consider changing the design of your heated grips. First of all, so that they integrate with the screen. I think that'd be wonderful. But if not that, just change the colours on them to work so you don't have to count the flashes. Factory integrated tyre sensors that again integrate with the display would be a great advance forward. The Rideology app needs a lot of improvements, but I believe that they're working on this constantly, so hopefully in the future we're going to see some improvements there. A larger wind deflector, but as stated, that's probably just going to always be an optional extra you get after you buy the bike. I would change the saddlebag, the saddlebags or the panniers to have a different shape, and I would definitely change the liners that go in there, the inner bags, the soft bags, to be a lot thicker. As I said, at this stage, go with the hot mills. Don't waste your money on the Kawasaki ones. Look, if I'm being really picky, the brake pressure sensor needs to be recalibrated, as I mentioned earlier, and clear up the manual a bit. Give us a little bit more detailed information on the ride mode settings and the functions, especially the finer details as to what to expect from the cruise control. But look, with all these points that I've brought out on the bike, this bike is extremely clean, extremely smooth, and I am so glad that I've switched from the VFR to this bike. Even if VFR brought out a 1000 bike, got rid of the VTAC, got rid of the linked brakes, I do not believe they could pull off a bike that would encourage ex-VFR owners that are now with Kawasaki to switch back. Kawasaki have really won me over with this bike. I really hope that this video has been worth your time watching, and that you've gotten some valuable information out of it to help you make a decision. Thanks for watching.